Hi guys, what's going on? So today I'm going to be reviewing a highly underrated fragrance, and it is Patchouli by Reminiscence Paris. And it's not my discovery. I was actually recommended this by a friend. And this fragrance, let's first talk about the value. I got this full 100 ml bottle on FragranceNet for $45. I do see that this size is currently unavailable, at least on FragranceNet, and FragranceX might be a little more expensive. They do have the 5 ounce, which I think is too much. But when this does come back, or you can find it at a good deal, I highly recommend it. I think, I blind bought it because at $45, I thought it would be sort of worth it. And definitely, it punches way above its price point. And this is a fragrance that, regardless of price, I think this is gorgeous. Now, I'll start by saying that I've never been the biggest fan of patchouli as a standalone note, or as sort of the star note in a fragrance. This obviously is named patchouli, and this was actually, I think this is their signature scent, Reminiscence, maybe one of their first scents they released. They I believe they started as a jewelry brand, and now they're independent, as a fragrance brand. But this was released in 1970, and for how long it's been around, it doesn't smell dated at all to me. I think you could always make the argument that, it smells sort of like it has a vintage feel about it, but that's just because of the notes in here. I think this is a very unique and still wearable creation today. So as I was saying, I wasn't the biggest fan of patchouli. As an example, I tried Le Labo's Patchouli 24, and I find that, as with that fragrance in general, when the patchouli becomes a focus, sometimes it's a little bit too intense and too maybe syrupy and medicinal, and also sometimes slightly bitter. And so that's what I didn't like when a fragrance is too patchouli forward. But when it's used in amber fragrances, I think it's great. It's one of the kind of key amber notes used in a lot of scents. It just adds a lot of balance to a lot of different fragrances. Now in here, this is actually an amber fragrance that is centered on patchouli. But patchouli is, of course, not the only note here. But I think that this is a great fragrance that lets you explore really the smell, the essence of patchouli and the different facets of patchouli. So let me tell you what it smells like. There is maybe, a slight transition in the smell, but overall I think it's a pretty stable smell. So for me, I know that some people don't love the opening, but for me, this was a love at first sniff. It's got, such a bold character, and that's what I love about it. Now, the first thing that I picked up on my initial impression, and even now, is actually a boozy nuance is probably the number one thing that I pick up in the beginning. And I'll talk a little bit more about this boozy nuance a bit later. But first, there is this very strong, booziness about it. And then the next thing that is sort of at the fore for me is a leather accord. So this immediately, at first you get a heavy dose of this smoky sweetness, slight fruitiness as well. That's quite intense, and again, you can immediately tell that there is a lot of patchouli in here, and that this is a patchouli scent. But at the same time, it's quite well-rounded, and I think it's a little bit, to me, easier on the nose than some other patchouli-based scents. To me, this is quite likable, and as it dries down, it gets even more delicious. So as I said, there is this leathery feel, and that's because the overall scent is very, very, initially it opens up a little bit more rich and with an ambery texture, and then it turns more and more dry to me, and dry and dusty. And so I thought a lot about what this kind of scent reminds me of in terms of images, and a couple different things come to mind. So maybe the number one thing at the moment is, this type of dry, leathery, yet sweet, alcoholic kind of scent, kind of reminds me of, it has an old library smell to it. Certain fragrances evoke that kind of image. And so if you like fragrances that sort of have this dusty, old library kind of feel to it, then I think you will enjoy this fragrance. Now, in addition to that aspect, this fragrance also has more of a woody base as well. That really blends with the leather. So sometimes it almost, later on I started to get the feel of smelling, damp wood out in nature after it's rained, right? So very earthy, again, soaked wood. And it's almost like, wood that's been soaked in some sort of liquor, some sort of alcohol. Barrel aged, that kind of feel. And again, that's, we're bringing in that boozy note as well. So the smell of damp wood, it kind of also paints the picture of like an old barn. So that could either be very, very appealing to you, or it might be, immediately that might be the reason you don't want to get this fragrance, but has that kind of very dusty, antique shop sort of feel to it, which I absolutely love. It's a very from natural fragrance from that standpoint. So it takes you out into the woodlands. As I smelled it more, we talked about the booziness that actually was the first thing that I picked up. And then this kind of fruitiness, which you get for, a long time actually with this scent. And it's almost, I tried to kind of think about what kind of fruit it is. I can't really pinpoint, but it has almost like a grape-like smell. Not a grape soda kind of artificial sweetener type of smell, but a berry-like, grape-like sort of fruit is how I can best describe it. But of course, underneath it is a lot of this leathery, strong, dry accord, and somewhat resinous as well. And then again, it has this very kind of thick feel. Well, not thick, but actually dusty. And in comparison to fragrances like Patchouli 24, I think this is kind of more airy and more fluffy. So because of this leathery accord, this wears kind of, drier and fluffier. So that's also what I like about this scent. It's an eau de toilette that performs like an eau de parfum, but it's not a thick fragrance. I would still reserve it for the cold weather because while it's not thick, it sort of has this texture that's enveloping. It could feel a little bit stuffy, but on cold days, I think it's just gonna warm you up perfectly. So we talked about the booziness, and then this leatheriness, and also woodiness, and ultimately the kind of thing that best captures a smell for me, right? I realized that it's sort of like smelling the cork, the soaked cork from an aged wine, because that gives you, wine often has a lot of earthy notes, and actually that's the kind of red wine that I enjoy, either earthy, spicy, dry wines. And this has, similarly, it has those different aspects. The fruitiness, right? Almost like an extract, right? And it of course has a strong earthy tone from the patchouli, a soil-like feel to it. Damp woods, but also dusty at the same time, reminding you of this kind of a barn out in nature, or a library if you prefer that kind of, scenery, or, wine in a barrel, that kind of feel. That's why I think this fragrance is so enjoyable to me. It just it smells like nothing else, at least that I have. But then again, I don't collect patchouli fragrances, but this is really perfect as it is. And especially coming in at that price, you know, I would not, personally would not hesitate to buy it. I would say if you like amber fragrances at all, you know, I think you should definitely try this. If you're somebody who avoids amber fragrances, of course, this is not for you because it's in that territory, right? Labdanum, Tolu balsam, patchouli, vanilla. I wouldn't say, you know, it's not overly sweet at all. Just because I mentioned vanilla, it's all sort of blending in together. And actually, the funny thing about this fragrance also is that this one is actually marketed towards women. There is a men's version like Patchouli Pour Homme or something, which I've not tried. But this scent, I mean, I don't get any sort of feminine vibes. I can see why maybe, you know, it sort of has, if you look at it in a bad way, a kind of old woman or maybe like a powderiness, right? It does at times remind me of a makeup stand, like, you know, from the vintage era, like that kind of thing. But again, I love it, but it could do that for you. I think it's the ambery sweetness that makes them kind of marketed towards women. But because of this overall leathery feel, I mean, I think you could argue this leans actually even masculine. So that's something I would not worry about at all in terms of this smelling feminine. And the more I smell it in the dry down, you know, what I'm really enjoying it also is this kind of spicy bite that, again, some wines have, earthy wines tend to have, and of course earthy fragrances, and of course patchouli, the note of patchouli can often draw out this kind of spicy nuance. Yeah, just this bite, a roughness about it. I didn't mention it. It also does remind me of kind of the leather here is kind of an animal, raw animal hide kind of feel because of this roughness. You know, smooth because it's an amber scent with vanilla and sweetened up a little bit, but rough because of, you know, this kind of boldness about this scent, just like the color. Actually, this is so good. You know, definitely give it a try, guys. And, you know, let me know if you've tried anything from this house. I'd like to know. So that's my review. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.